March 6, 1944. 23,000 feet above Germany. The air was thin, the fear thicker. The B-17 Hell's Fury rumbled toward Augsburg. Deep in enemy skies, its silver wings cutting through sunlight and anti-aircraft smoke. 10 men inside flew toward history. One of them, in the loneliest seat of all, was about to change air combat forever. In the tail gun position sat Staff Sergeant Michael "Mad Mike" Donovan, a South Boston dock worker turned gunner, gripping the twin .50 caliber Brownings that stood between his crew and oblivion. Below him, the black forest shimmered like water. Ahead, 12 dark specks appeared on the horizon. Messerschmitt Bf 109S, the Luftwaffe's best. He knew what the manual said. Hold your fire until they attack. He knew what experience said. Save ammo, stay alive. And he knew what his instinct said. Shoot first. Before we dive into the 4 minutes that rewrote every rule of aerial defense, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and leave a comment about where you're watching from. Every click helps us keep these forgotten stories alive. Stories of courage, madness, and men like Mike Donovan who refused to die quietly. Donovan wasn't supposed to be here. The Air Corps had wanted him turning wrenches, not manning guns. But South Boston raised fighters, not mechanics. His father had worked the docks. His brother boxed Golden Gloves. Mike learned early, waiting gets you hurt. Striking first keeps you breathing. At gunnery school, he broke rules, shot early, ignored orders to conserve ammunition. The instructors called him reckless. Donovan grinned. "Dead gunners don't shoot back," he said. "Live ones do." He graduated third in his class, not for accuracy, but for speed. He could lock, track, and fire before anyone else even saw the target. When he arrived at Framlingham, England in early '44, the Hell's Fury already carried a curse. 3 missions, 2 gunners dead, 1 transferred home, shaking. The crew chief warned him, "Tail position's bad luck." "I'll take it," Donovan replied without blinking. Captain James Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "You know the casualty rate? 38% don't finish their tour." "Then I got 62% odds," Donovan said. "I'll take them." Whitmore smirked. "You're insane." "Then I'll fit right in." At dawn, the engines thundered awake. Oil smoke drifted across the runway. The ground trembled as bombers rolled into formation. Donovan climbed into the tail, locked himself inside a glass bubble no wider than a closet. Once the hatch sealed, he was alone, surrounded by sky, steel, and silent. By 8 a.m., they crossed into German airspace. Sunlight flashed across the aluminum fuselage. The intercom crackled. "Bandits, 6 o'clock high, 12 of them. 12 Bf 109Ms forming up for the kill." The official doctrine was clear. Wait, hold fire, protect ammo. But Donovan had never believed in official doctrine. He rotated his turret, lined up the approaching formation, and opened fire at 2,000 yards, nearly a mile out, well before any sane gunner would shoot. The tracer streaked white across the morning sky, a defiant lightning storm. Most rounds missed completely, but the result wasn't measured in hits, it was measured in chaos. The German formation wavered. The lead pilot banked away. The wingmen hesitated. For the first time, the hunters blinked. "Cease fire!" Captain Whitmore shouted over the radio. "You're wasting ammo!" "Negative, sir," Donovan said evenly. "Just bought us a few seconds of life." Seconds meant survival, and survival for a tail gunner was everything. Up there in the cold, thin air of war, one man had broken the oldest rule in the book. Never go looking for a fight. But Donovan wasn't looking. He was inviting it, forcing the enemy to react to him, rewriting combat with every burst of tracer fire. He didn't know it yet, but those 4 minutes would change the 8th Air Force forever. Aggression, not defense, would become the new language of survival. And Michael Donovan, the kid from the docks, was about to prove that sometimes the best way to stay alive is to go down fighting first. Michael Donovan's first burst of gunfire over Augsburg had been pure instinct, a reckless, impossible act born from the kind of street logic you don't learn in gunnery school. But instinct, when it works, becomes theory. And theory, when it saves lives, becomes doctrine. 2 days after that first encounter, Donovan sat in the barracks of Framlingham Airfield, a cigarette smouldering between his fingers, replaying the fight in his head. The German formation had scattered. The bomber had survived. He'd been called crazy over the intercom, but crazy men weren't supposed to come home alive. He began to study, not from manuals, but from the sky itself, from every pattern, every maneuver, every hesitation he'd seen through the twin mirrors of his gun sight. German fighters, he realized, weren't random. They were mathematical. They attacked in disciplined formations, 4 or 6 at a time, approaching from the stern quarter high, using geometry and coordination to divide the gunner's attention. The lead fighter drew the fire. The wingmen killed the distracted. It was elegant, predictable, deadly. And in that predictability, Donovan saw opportunity. The flaw wasn't in the bombers, it was in the rhythm. American gunners waited. Germans attacked. The enemy dictated tempo. Every manual, every training lecture, every approved tactic assumed defense. What if you flipped the rhythm? What if you attacked first, shattered their organization before it solidified? He wasn't trying to be a hero, he was trying to survive. When he approached Captain Whitmore before the next mission, the pilot already looked wary. "Aggressive fire again?" Whitmore asked. Donovan nodded. "Permission to test something, sir. Controlled burst before they commit." The captain frowned. "That burns ammunition." Donovan's answer was calm. "So does dying." Whitmore stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "You've got one mission to prove it. If it fails, you're grounded." Donovan grinned. "Then I'd better not fail." The morning of March 6th was cold and cloudless. Hell's Fury rose into the pale sky, her silver skin glinting like a mirror. The formation crossed the Dutch coast at 22,000 feet. Visibility was perfect. Terrible news for bombers. At 9:19, the call came over the intercom. "Bandits, 6 o'clock high, 12 of them." Donovan twisted in his seat, eyes narrowing. The Bf-109S were forming up again. Textbook perfect. 2,000 yards out, just like the diagrams. He didn't wait. The first burst of tracers streaked towards the horizon. Absurdly far, a mile of empty air between him and the enemy. But the tracers weren't meant to kill. They were meant to warn. The German formation reacted exactly as he'd predicted. The lead fighter broke right, the second pulled up, and the remaining pilots hesitated. Coordination fractured. Whitmore's voice crackled through the intercom. "You're wasting ammo!" Donovan replied. "Negative, sir. Look closer." Through his sight, he saw it. The subtle unraveling of discipline. German pilots no longer glided in perfect formation. They twitched, adjusted, lost their edge. He'd changed the rhythm. He fired another short burst, this one not wild but measured, a diagonal sweep through the formation center. One fighter broke too late. The tracers walked into his fuselage. Flame burst from the engine, a black spiral cutting through sunlight. The waist gunners shouted, "You got one!" But Donovan didn't hear them. He was already tracking the next. The second fighter came from high 6, diving hard. Donovan let it close. 1,200 yards, 1,800, then held the trigger down for 3 full seconds. 200 rounds spat fire into the sky. The Messerschmitt disintegrated. Inside the cockpit, Whitmore and the co-pilot could feel the vibrations. The hammering rhythm of defiance from the tail. The formation of German fighters began to falter, their perfect geometry collapsing into self-preservation. Within 60 seconds, 6 fighters had disengaged. The rest made erratic passes that missed completely. Hell's Fury kept flying straight. When they landed that afternoon, the crew chief counted bullet holes across the tail. 37 in the fuselage, none critical. "You drew every gun in Germany," he said. Donovan just smiled, and lived to tell about it. Word spread through the group before nightfall. A tail gunner who didn't wait for the enemy. A madman who fired at ghosts and made real pilots flinch. They called him Crazy Mike. They didn't understand yet that he wasn't insane. He was logical, dangerously logical. In war, logic isn't what's written in manuals. Logic is what keeps you breathing when the math says you shouldn't. Donovan had found his formula. Fight fear with aggression, fight chaos with control, and fight death with timing. By the end of that week, every tail gunner at Framlingham wanted to fly behind Hell's Fury. Not because they thought Donovan was lucky, but because they'd seen what happened when a man refused to be hunted. The sun hung low and white above the clouds when Hell's Fury crossed into the target zone. From the pilot's seat, Augsburg looked like a map of smoke and steel. From Donovan's turret, it looked like a graveyard waiting to happen. The intercom was alive with clipped voices, checklists, coordinates, tension disguised as procedure. At 9:19, the call came that froze the crew mid-breath. Bandits, 6 o'clock high, 12, repeat 12, BF 109S inbound. Donovan's world narrowed to the small circle of glass in front of him. He could see them now, black specks glinting in sunlight. The Luftwaffe's best, veterans who'd already killed more bombers than he could count. They were climbing fast, perfectly spaced, moving with the confidence of men who expected another easy kill. Every instinct screamed at him to hold fire, but instinct was exactly what he was trying to rewrite. He waited until the formation began to spread, saw the tiny glint as one German tipped his wing in signal, and then pressed both triggers. The twin point 50S roared, tracers slicing the blue like twin comets. The Germans weren't hit. Most rounds burned out hundreds of feet short, but the effect was electric. The formation broke apart instantly. The lead fighter pulled high, the wingman rolled left, another dove under the formation entirely. The precision was gone. For a few seconds, the entire sky above Augsburg turned chaotic. Whitmore's voice cracked out through the intercom. "Cease fire, you're burning through ammo!" Donovan ignored him. He was already tracking another target, his hands moving like a machine, his breathing steady. The tracers danced across the sky again. Short bursts, controlled rhythm, the sound of defiance echoing through the fuselage. One of the BF 109S banked too late. A thin wisp of smoke bloomed from its wing. Then the aircraft disintegrated in mid-turn. Donovan's turret vibrated with recoil, but he didn't flinch. "One down," he muttered. The next came straight on, nose down, cannon flashing. Donovan held his fire until 1,000 yards, then unleashed 200 rounds in a single sustained burst. The German flew straight into the storm. His engine erupted in flame, pieces spinning away like sparks from a forge. The shockwave rattled Hell's Fury's tail, but the bomber held steady. The waist gunners joined in, their tracers arcing from the fuselage sides like wings of fire. For 30 seconds, the air was filled with streaking light and falling wreckage. 3 fighters gone, 9 to go. Donovan's voice was calm over the intercom. 6 o'clock clear, reforming on 7. He shifted his aim, watching 6 more fighters diving in pairs. It was perfect discipline, German to the core. He waited until they hit 1,400 yards, then fired. Not at the lead, but at the second in line, the one who expected safety. The fighter vanished in an instant, a ball of orange fire tumbling toward the earth. The lead pilot jerked upward in shock and nearly collided with his wingman. The attack crumbled before it ever began. "Holy hell, he's breaking them up!" the radio operator shouted. Whitmore said nothing. He was too busy holding the fortress level through the turbulence of its own gunfire. In 4 minutes, Donovan had fired over 1,200 rounds. His voice came again. 8 left, they're reforming higher. I'm switching belts." He reloaded with mechanical precision, pulling the new ammunition into place while smoke drifted through his turret. The smell of cordite and oil filled the air, a scent that every bomber crew learned to associate with staying alive. The next wave came harder, 6 fighters straight in, 4 more flanking wide. The sky filled with cannon flashes. One shell tore through the tail plating, another ricocheted past Donovan's elbow. He didn't move. He fired on the lead fighter, holding the trigger until the guns overheated. The tracers walked across the German's nose, through the canopy, and out the other side. The fighter erupted in a rolling spiral of smoke. Another tried to take its place, diving straight through the debris. Donovan shifted half an inch and squeezed again. The burst hit dead center. 2 kills in 6 seconds. Inside the turret, brass shells clattered around his boots. His oxygen mask was slick with sweat, but his movements were pure muscle memory now. One fighter after another broke off, dove away, or exploded in midair. The crew could barely comprehend what they were watching. A single gunner holding back a full staffel. When the last Bf-109 turned and fled west, the intercom went quiet except for the sound of breathing. Donovan checked his counters. 800 rounds gone, 1,200 left. The entire attack had lasted less than 4 minutes. Whitmore finally spoke. "Report damage," the waist gunners replied. "Rudders hit but holding, minor inboard fuel leak, no injuries." Then a pause. "Tail guns, status?" Donovan answered, voice steady. "Operational. Recommend resupply of ammo when we land." The understatement made the crew laugh, a nervous, disbelieving sound that cut through the static. When Hell's Fury returned to Framlingham, the crew chief climbed the ladder into the tail, flashlights sweeping over jagged holes in the armor. He counted 47 impacts and one man still sitting calmly in his seat, cleaning the barrels. "You fired everything?" he asked. Donovan nodded. "Had to." "How many?" 12 confirmed. "Maybe more," he said quietly. "Didn't have time to count." That night, the debrief officers wrote it up as exceptional defensive action. But among the crews, a legend was already forming. One gunner had taken on a dozen fighters and won. He hadn't waited for death to arrive. He'd met it halfway and sent it home smoking. The morning after the Augsburg mission, Framlingham Airfield was still buzzing with disbelief. Word of Hell's Fury's survival had spread faster than the smell of burned gunpowder that lingered in its fuselage. Crews gathered on the tarmac just to touch the aircraft that had fought 12 Messerschmitts and returned whole. Donovan sat quietly on an overturned ammunition crate, oil on his hands, a cigarette between his fingers. He didn't see himself as a hero. Heroes were the men who died following the rules. He'd simply broken them and lived. The debriefing report was clinical, almost sterile. Exceptional accuracy, aggressive initiative, 12 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed. But behind those words was a truth that the paper couldn't capture. Donovan had done what no one thought possible. He had turned the weakest position on a B-17, the tail, into the most dangerous gun in the sky. And now, everyone wanted to know how. When Major General Friedrich Andersen, commanding officer of the 8th Air Force's Bomber Division, arrived unannounced 2 days later, he didn't waste time with ceremony. He found Donovan near the hangars cleaning his twin Brownings. "Sergeant Donovan," he said, "I've read your report. I want to hear it from you." Donovan stood, saluted, and answered plainly. "Sir, I stopped waiting for them to shoot first." The general frowned. "You're telling me you fired before they were in range?" "Yes, sir, I wasn't aiming for hits. I was aiming for fear." Anderson studied him for a long moment. "You understand that's not standard doctrine?" "Yes, sir," Donovan said, "but standard doctrine's killing our men." The general didn't reply right away. He glanced at Hell's Fury, riddled with holes, still standing proud in the morning light. "Write it down," he ordered finally. "Everything, every detail. We're going to test it." That night, Donovan began outlining what would become known as the Donovan Doctrine. He wasn't an academic, but the language was pure logic written in grease pencil on the back of a map. Principle 1. Seize initiative. Attack the attackers before they organize. Principle 2. Psychological pressure. Fire not to destroy, but to disrupt. Principle 3. Concentrate fire on the most dangerous axis. Principle 4. Accept risk, because hesitation kills faster than bullets. Within a week, the Air Force had assembled a small group of gunners from across England to observe his methods. Donovan stood before them in the chill of the hangar, jacket unzipped, voice steady. "They say the tail gunner's the loneliest man in the sky," he began. "They're wrong. The loneliest man is the one who waits to die." The recruits listened in silence as he broke down his method step by step. When to open fire, how to read formation spacing, how to use tracers as intimidation rather than precision. He wasn't teaching marksmanship. He was teaching psychology. The first training flight tested the doctrine under supervision. Two B-17s flew parallel tracks, while P-47s played the role of intercepting fighters. Donovan instructed his trainees to open fire at maximum range, 2,000 yards, before the mock attackers committed. The P-47 pilots later admitted the shock of seeing tracers that early forced them to pull wide or abort runs entirely. Even in simulation, the effect worked. By the end of the month, Anderson's staff had data showing aggressive defensive fire reduced successful enemy passes by nearly 50%. Resistance came from the old guard. Senior officers called it reckless. Armament officers complained about wasted ammunition. "You can't shoot your way out of mathematics," one colonel warned. Donovan disagreed. "You can if the other guy's math depends on you doing nothing." Slowly, the statistics silenced doubt. In March, tail gunner casualty rates in the 8th Air Force stood at 38%. By June, after aggressive fire tactics spread through bomber groups, they dropped to 23%. The numbers didn't lie. The real proof came from the enemy. Luftwaffe radio intercepts began reporting strange new American behavior. Defensive fire at extreme range, disrupting formations before contact. German pilots nicknamed the tactic the American madness. They feared bombers that shot too early because early fire meant confidence, and confidence meant danger. By summer 1944, Donovan was no longer flying combat missions. Anderson had reassigned him to a new program, the Aggressive Gunnery School, based at Thorpe Abbotts. His classroom was a hangar, his blackboard a section of bullet-riddled aluminum. He trained hundreds of gunners, not just in shooting, but in thinking. "Aggression isn't chaos," he told them. "It's control disguised as violence. You own the sky when the other guy starts doubting his plan." Every new graduate carried pieces of Donovan's philosophy into battle. Some were killed, many survived, but all of them changed the way bombers fought. Reports from across Europe told the same story. German fighters attacking American formations broke off more often, hesitated longer, shot less accurately. Fear, once the bomber's curse, had become its shield. Late that year, Donovan stood beside Hell's Fury for the last time. The aircraft was grounded for good. Her skin patched a dozen times over, her logbook filled with miracles. He ran a hand along the scarred metal and smiled faintly. "She was faster than fear," he whispered. For a man who turned madness into method, that was the truest epitaph of all. The war moved on, but Michael Donovan's name refused to disappear. Even as the front lines shifted east and the bombers traded Europe's winter for France's spring, the story of the mad gunner of Hell's Fury spread like a rumor with wings. Crews whispered his name before takeoff, not as a legend, but as a reminder that fear could be fought the same way as enemy fire, with aggression. By May 1944, his methods had become standard practice across the 8th Air Force. Gunners who once waited now shot first. Formations that had once broken under German attack began surviving entire missions without a single loss. For the first time, American bombers dictated the rhythm of the sky. When Donovan walked through the rows of young airmen at Thorpe Abbotts, he could see his reflection in their faces, the same mix of tension and defiance. He taught them that survival wasn't about hiding behind armor, but about owning the fight before it owned you. "If you shoot first," he'd say, pacing between gun mounts, "you don't give fear time to talk." His doctrine wasn't theory anymore, it was a culture. The results were staggering. By June 1944, tail gunner casualty rates had fallen almost 40%. Fighter attack completion rates dropped to half of what they'd been 3 months earlier. Luftwaffe radio intercepts revealed frustration and confusion. "American bombers no longer defensive," one report read. "They attack before we can." Another German officer called the change psychological warfare, noting, "Their fire begins before logic says it should. We lose nerve." For For the first time since 1942, the hunters feared their prey. Donovan himself never boasted about it. He refused interviews, rarely spoke of his missions. He saw his name printed in internal memos, mentioned in after-action reports, even in a few newspaper clippings back home. But he always brushed it off. "The doctrine's what matters," he told a fellow instructor one evening, staring at the horizon over East Anglia. "Not the man who wrote it." When the war ended, Donovan didn't stay in uniform. He declined promotions, returned to Boston, and worked construction. The war had taught him enough about noise. Now he wanted silence. For years, no one recognized him as the man who had changed aerial combat. He walked past veterans' parades, nodded to old comrades, and never once mentioned Augsburg. The medals he'd earned, Distinguished Service Cross, Air Medal with clusters, stayed in a drawer beneath a box of spent shells from Hell's Fury. But history, as it tends to, refused to stay quiet. After the war, the US Army Air Forces commissioned an internal study comparing pre- and post-Donovan doctrine missions. The numbers were unambiguous. Between March and August 1944, bomber losses dropped by 43%. Analysts credited improved fighter escort, tighter formations, and aggressive defensive fire. In a classified appendix, they mentioned one name: Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan. His methods spread far beyond bombers. By 1946, versions of the Donovan Doctrine had been adopted by naval gunners, fighter escorts, even ground anti-aircraft units. The idea of attacking early to disrupt coordination became a pillar of modern combat. The Soviet Union studied his tactics. Britain and even post-war Germany referenced them in training manuals. What began as the instinct of a street fighter became a global principle of survival. Initiative is the best armor. When Donovan died in 1998 at the age of 76, his obituary in the Boston Globe mentioned only one line about his service. Developed new tactics as a B-17 tail gunner during World War II. It didn't list his kills, his doctrine, or the thousands of airmen who lived because of him. His funeral was small, 17 people at St. Augustine Cemetery. His family, a few old comrades, and 2 men from his training class who had survived 25 missions each. They didn't speak of medals or numbers. They just raised their glasses in the quiet after the service and said, "To Mike, the man who made the sky fight back." That night, halfway across the country, in an Air Force training room at Lackland, new recruits sat through a lecture titled Aggressive Defense, the Donovan Principle. The instructor began the same way Donovan once had. Fear happens when you react. Confidence happens when you act first. On the wall behind him hung a faded photo. A B-17 with a scarred tail, sunlight glinting through bullet holes. Michael Donovan never saw his own legacy, but the world flew with it. Every gunner who refused to wait, every pilot who attacked before the enemy could aim, every soldier who decided to seize the initiative instead of hiding behind caution, they were all echoes of the man who, one morning in 1944, looked death in the eye and pulled the trigger first. And if you're watching this now, remembering that lone gunner in the glass bubble of Hell's Fury, you're part of that legacy too. These stories survive because we keep them alive. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from. Every comment, every click helps preserve the memories of men who turned fear into fire and prove that even in war, courage is contagious.